All right, welcome back to another episode of PR Yourself with Leah Frazier. And I'm very excited to introduce our next guest. And he's going to talk about a topic that really, Seth, I didn't tell you this, but it's chapping my ass right now. With everybody calling themselves a storyteller, I'm storytelling or I'm a storyteller, but are you really? Are you really? Oh, I have Seth Donlin here to talk about what storytelling truly is and what you really should be doing as,
Sure. Yeah.
with his storytelling skeptic guide. So, welcome, Seth.
Thank you, Leah. It's really great to be here. I love talking about story. That's why it's what I do for a living. And I'm super excited to share that with your audience.
But have you seen the shift yourself? I mean, I feel like it's so funny. I was having a conversation with someone the other day that at first it was, I'm a blogger, and then
Mm.
I'm an influencer, and then I'm media. And
I'm a
now,
creator, and
oh, I was
yeah,
gonna just say that one. I'm a content creator, and now
right.
it's storyteller. So, like, what are you seeing? Are you seeing it too?
Sure. Well, I mean, I probably am looking at it from a slightly different lens, and to hear you frame it like that makes me realize, yeah, you're right. I mean, for me, it's a little more, as you can imagine, it's a little more exciting because I'm like, all right, people are finally getting it. They're trying to tell story. The flip side of that coin, of course, is what you're talking about, where, okay, you're trying to tell stories. You're not quite there yet, right? You're not quite a storyteller yet. Um, or you're not telling, you're look, it's just like anything else. Like, when you're six, you're playing basketball. That doesn't mean that you're a professional basketball player, right? You can call yourself but a 6-year-old kid loves to play basketball. They can call themselves a basketball player, but we understand that there's a difference there in ability and level. And I think, it's fine to call yourself a storyteller, but if you're going to make that claim, you're going to call yourself a storyteller and you're an adult, then you need to be investing in becoming a good storyteller. You just don't grab the mantle and you're all done, right? Like anything else in business, you got to get coaches, you got to read books, you've got to practice, you've got to join Toastmasters or whatever you're going to do to actually get better at being a storyteller.
I was like, read books. Mostly I still read
Right.
books. I just got back from
Absolutely.
Portland and I had no idea Portland was a book city. And so I lost my mind. I brought so many books back, but so many people, they do Audible or they just don't read at all these days.
Right.
So,
Right. No, they've got
so
that
anyway,
they've got that great bookstore up there in Portland, don't they? It's like two city blocks or something like that. Am I thinking
Powell's.
about Yeah, such a good bookstore.
I wasn't warned. I was not warned. I lost my mind in there. They were like, "Where are you?" I'm on floor 4,
Yeah, right.
going up to the next level. But anywho, so let's go back a little bit. In
Okay.
your definition as an expert, what is storytelling if somebody's listening in and they're like, I don't know if I do that or not?
Well, I mean, of course, there's all kinds of different types of storytelling, right? We've been telling stories. I mean, storytelling is an important part of humans, the story of humanity, right? I mean, we, you just talked about it. Now we have Audible and we listen to podcasts and read blogs and watch movies and stuff. But, right, thousands of years ago, 10,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, all we had was verbal communication, nonverbal, obviously gestures and stuff. But to communicate something, you didn't write a book, you didn't go out and teach a class, you told a story in order to convey information. So people have been telling stories. We as a species are a storytelling species. But of course, there's all kinds of stories. There's a story you tell somebody when you get home from a long day about something that annoyed you or something that excited you. And that's a nice way to share a piece of yourself and share a piece of your life. There's the story that you're that your child tells you or that you tell to a child to entertain and delight them and to bond with them in that way, right? That's all storytelling too. But we're talking about storytelling in a business sense. um, there's got to be a business purpose behind that story, and there's a number of reasons that you might tell story in business. You might tell story to tell the history of your brand. You might tell story about a client journey so that other potential clients can see themselves in that client journey. You can tell a story about a success that your business had. You could tell a story about a failure that your business had, to own that, and then but then you have to take the next step to explain how you fixed whatever it was that ended up causing that problem, right? And now you are a stronger, better, more able to serve your customer. You're a business that is more able to serve your customer, right? And that's, I mean, there are other stories you can tell, right? But the point of a story in business is that it should be serving some purpose. Should be serving to connect you to your audience, your client, your customer. It should be serving to, emphasize the differentiator in your business, in your product, in your service. There's got to be some reason behind it. You're not just telling a story to make somebody laugh, to make somebody cry, like we might be doing amongst friends, amongst family members, amongst coworkers or something like that. That's a different type of story.
And so what I'm hearing you say, especially from like a small business perspective, that storytelling is everywhere. It's your website, it's social media, it's your messaging on your LinkedIn platform, even in PR. It's what is the story or what's the messaging that you're bringing on TV or on radio, and making sure it's all consistent and that it matches. I guess my question for some folks who have never really considered, they're just kind of they just do things day by day. Like what's
Sure.
the first step without being overwhelmed with I've got 100 stories to tell?
It's a good question. I think the first step is, well, it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg. You can do it one of two ways. There's two things. Let's see the first two steps that you need to do. One, you need to get clear on what it is that you need your stories to accomplish. And again, just as I said, it can and probably should be multiple things. You need to tell stories about, who you are as a company. You need to tell stories about who your customer base is so that people listening to your story can say, okay, that's me. I need to pay attention. You need to tell stories about all kinds of different things. I mean, tell a story about a sale that's coming up or whatever, right? There's all kinds of business purposes that you have for telling stories. And you've got to get clear on that, because if you're not clear on that, then how do you know what story to tell? You tell a story and hope that it does what you want it to do. I mean, that's obviously not a recipe for success. The other thing is you need to start working on what are my stories? What stories do I have that I can tell? And that really comes from, it's really as simple as grabbing a notebook. I mean, clearly you can do it digitally. You can keep a spreadsheet on, Google Docs or Excel or however you want to do it. But you need to be, if you want to be using story, you need to be thinking story. And not all of us think this way. I mean, right? When I was in college, I was in a creative writing program. I had friends that were photographers. I had friends that were dancers, right? We all saw the world through a different lens. Everything to me was a story. Everything to my photographer friend was a photograph, a way to frame something in photo. The dancer wanted to, express it through movement. So if you're not somebody that thinks story all the time naturally, okay, it's something you have to work on. You have to practice. But the first thing to do is grab a notebook, start. And I don't mean journaling like you're writing for 15 minutes of writing out the story, but list the story. If you are coming home at the end of the day, or you're back from lunch, right? You're coming home at the end of the day and you're talking to your partner. You're coming back from lunch and you're talking to a coworker. If you're telling them a story, oh my, you're not going to believe what I saw while I was out. Put it in your journal. It may have, it may turn out that story is totally useless to you in business. but it might turn out that it is totally useful to you in business. A couple months ago, I was at the grocery store. As I mentioned, I live in a kind of a pretty small city. And so it's the small local family owned chain. And I had put my daughter to bed and I was racing out to just get a couple of things before the store closed. And I rush around through the grocery store and I get up to the checkout counter. And this is again a small town. They still have baggers and it's a pretty nice little place. And there's just one aisle open. There's no self checkout there. There's just one aisle open, and maybe one person in front of me. I wait. I get up to get rung up, and I don't know. I'm a storyteller, so I start telling a story. We're chit chatting. We start laughing, and the woman who's ringing me up, she says, "See, that is why you're one of our favorite customers because you're always in such a great mood. You just help the day to go by faster." Now, granted, I'm pretty touched by this, right? It's a nice thing to hear. And I look over at the woman who's bagging, and she kind of like raises her eyebrows and gives me a like, yeah, I agree. So now I'm feeling really great about myself. I thank them. I grab my stuff and I walk out the door. The truth is, I was not in a great mood. I was, in fact, at the store to buy a bunch of sugar and caffeine to help try to make myself feel better because since I was a teenager, I've suffered from depression and anxiety. And it's a struggle for me, exercise and other things, good diet. I usually ignore the sugar and the caffeine, but good diet, I can kind of regulate things. But I do struggle with being in a positive mood. I also decided years ago that if I'm authentically a person that struggles with depression and anxiety, but I'm also authentically a person that can be very positive and very confident and very upbeat, that in any interaction that I have with people, I can choose to be one or the other. And when I was at the grocery store, I chose to be in a positive mood because why do I need to bring my depression and my anxiety on those people, right? The reason why I'm telling this, what has this got to do with storytelling, is because I teach my clients that when they're going to be telling their story, when they're going up on stage, when they're hitting record for their, live streams, for their, you know, social media video posts and stuff, that they need to be authentic, but authentic doesn't necessarily mean being exactly how they feel at that moment, right?
Yeah.
You can be confident some days and not confident other days. It's not inauthentic to put your confident mantle on, to put your confident mask on, right? And serve your audience the way they deserve to be served. Now, I just told you a story about me going to the grocery store. And for me, not for everybody, right? But for me, that serves a business purpose. It helps me to teach my clients what they need to know, right? And so you've got to get that notebook and you've got to put down in your notebook these little stories that pop up in your lives because you never know what little story it's going to be that helps you to tell the story that you need, right? And I can go on and on. I've got so many stories that are just everyday, normal life stories. They're not me climbing a mountain or winning an award or rescuing somebody from a burning building or something like that. Like, if you've got those stories, well, they can be good too, right? But it's the little things often that make the best stories because we all have those little experiences. And so we can all relate to those little experiences. I was telling you that story. I could see you. You were smiling. You were nodding. I was vulnerable and talked about my depression and anxiety, and you were responding. And right. And it's these things that help us connect with particularly those of us in service industries, right? I'm not selling a widget. I'm selling myself partially in my
Right.
services. So it helps for me to connect to people on that level. Different businesses have to decide how they need to connect with their audience. But don't discount the big takeaway is don't discount those little everyday stories. Don't say, I would love to tell stories, but I don't have any stories. I didn't have a big adventure. You know, I didn't play professional football. I don't have any stories to tell. The fact is that we all have lots of little great stories to tell.
I'm really inspired by that because just last week it's crazy. So I have a wellness business. I spent 650 or $700 on a rain stick. And anybody that knows me knows that like I love my instruments, I love sound baths, I love sound meditation. And ironically, last week I was getting ready to do a sound bath, and it's like my precious stick. Nobody can touch it. Nobody. It's about 4 feet tall. Need a year to buy
Nice.
it because it's custom made. It's by a husband and wife team. Like I know the story behind how they create it, so it's my special stick. And I had it behind my truck the other day as I was like unloading. And as I turned, the bag on my shoulder hit the stick, and all I could hear was crack on the concrete.
Ooh.
And I was like, no, 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 I'm going to look down and it's still going to be in one piece because I'm just thinking financially, like, no, this isn't happening. And sure enough, I looked down and it was cracked. And I just felt my heart just like sink. Like I haven't had it for like probably 6 or 7 months. And how could I have been so stupid? And so I just pick it up. I didn't have time to get worked up about it. I had to go set up for my class, put it in the back of my SUV, head into class. And for one, I was like, well, I was pretty calm about this. So clearly this meditation and mindfulness stuff is working.
Good for you.
And then it came to me that I went to an exhibit in Portland called Kintsugi. And if I'm pronouncing it wrong, it's like the Japanese art form of
Oh,
taking
yeah, yeah.
broken things and
Yes.
mending it back. And the way you mend it, even with its imperfections, it ends up being even more beautiful than it was in its
Right.
original form. So I'm sitting there setting up, upset that like my God, my dear rain stick is just shattered. And then I start thinking like, but you could probably gorilla glue that. And then maybe just like they did with Kintsugi, you could put some gold or some paint or something around it and make
Yeah,
it something
right.
really cool. Like it's not broken. It just needs to be repaired. And it's gonna be like maybe it's gonna heal a lot of people after this. I don't know.
Sure.
And so I left that sound bath like, oh my God, I'm gonna name it Kintsugi and I'm going to kintsugi it back together and I'm going to document it and tell people on social media like what happened. And
Absolutely.
and yeah, instead of throwing it away or spending another $700 because it wasn't perfect, you know? And so that's
Well,
what
there's
your storytelling is reminding me of.
Yeah, and I mean, I can see multiple stories in that one. I mean, there's a great story like you're saying, hey, we don't have to be disposable culture. I can repair this and it can be lovely. It can be maybe even better than it was before. But there's also the story of which you told in the middle there. It's the story of, hey, this meditation is working for me, right? I had this thing happen that normally would have spun me out, and I would have showed up at the class, and I maybe wouldn't have been able to really serve my customers the way that I really want to serve them because I'm so thrown off by my rain stick having been broken. But no, I actually was centered. I was pretty calm. I had some positive thoughts about it, and that's all because of and then you talk about the meditation or the whatever it is that you're looking to you know not sell
Promote.
in a bad way,
Yeah.
right? But that what you're looking to sell your audience on, right?
Yeah.
So, and there's if we sat down and brainstormed, I bet you we could come up with two or three other ways that you could use that same story, right? It's writ once you get into it and you start playing with it can get fun. For me it's fun, but it also gets very rich, and you can see that there's a lot more that you can there's a lot more in your life that you can mine for these stories than you initially think.
That's fantastic. So I did it right. Because I wrote it down in my phone and I was like, there's something here to tie these two together. And I wrote it
Yeah.
down and I put it in my notes. And then I went and taught my class. And so I was like, I was like, there's something here. It's a tie between the two. So yeah, cool.
I mean, the thing we've got to all remember, right? People are going to tell stories about us anyway. I mean, they just do. When I was when I first met my wife, I was trying to break into journalism, freelancing and whatnot. I was working as a bartender. My wife was also working as a bartender, and I would go into her bar sometimes after my shift was over and meet up with friends. And I had a friend, my friend L, that I would often meet, and we would sit down and I'd have a beer or a cocktail and like an appetizer, and Elle would do the same, except Elle really liked champagne. So she would always get herself a split of champagne. And my not yet wife, but my wife, Michaela, would like kind of not pay extra attention to us, but set the part of the bar up really nicely, and then kind of step away and leave us alone. And will tell this story all the time when people ask about how we met, because she was convinced that Elle and I were coming in on regular dates, and that the champagne, it was a special thing. And now, as it turns out, my wife was living my neighborhood. I would bump into her and I'm trying to chat her up, right? Which I wouldn't do at her work because I'm a bartender. She's a bartender. I get it. I'm not going to get much of anywhere hitting on her at work, right? So I'd be chatting her up in the neighborhood, bump into her at the grocery store. And I'm like, man, she seems very friendly and stuff, but this is just not getting anywhere. And as it turns out, it was because she thought I was dating my friend L, right? My wife had, nobody was asking her to come up with a story about what was going on between me and Elle, but she created that story. We all do. We create stories about everything, right? I create stories about you create stories about me. We are always creating stories. And so um, it's important that we tell our stories. And I think it's important that we tell our stories from the genuine place of, this is really what's going on in my life and this is what's happening, right? Rather than like, I'm going to craft this special story about my business, which isn't not true, but it's not also not maybe authentic to who I am, right? Because you want to make sure that in an effort to win the story battle, right? Your story, our stories that we're telling are battling against the stories that other people are telling about us, about our business, about our
Right.
industry, right? And so make sure that you are deploying the ones that are really going to put you in the best light and are going to be truest to who you are and who you really want to be.
I'm curious to know your perspective. We just did a podcast episode on oversharing on social media.
Ooh, I
So it's
listened to that
almost
one
as
with
if
Cynthia.
yeah,
That
Cynthia,
was a good one.
I love Cynthia. So it's almost like we've reached the point too where some people don't know where to reel it
Mm.
back. So in your professional opinion, how far is too far? Do you have best practices where you're like, be vulnerable, but not that vulnerable?
Yeah, right. Well, one thing I was thinking about the whole time, as I was hoping you would bring it up, or I would figure out a way to bring it up, because I was like, I
Thank
want to talk
you.
about this, because this idea of oversharing is absolutely true, but it leads some people to undershare in right, like the pendulum swings too far in the other direction. And so the thing that I've always believed, and I didn't come up with this concept, and it just, when I heard it, I was like, that explains it so perfectly. It's good to be vulnerable, and it's good to share around like our wounds, but you don't share about your wound when you're bleeding, and you don't even share about your wound when it's still all raw and you're trying to deal with it. You share about your wound when the wound's all scabbed over, and you are done with all that struggle and you now have gotten the wisdom that came along with whatever it was that caused that wound, right? If you're if you're sharing while the injury is happening and while the struggle is going on, you're not, that's not the place to, right? You're not in a place of being able to convey wisdom and help your client base, your customer base. You're in a place of needing help yourself, and right, and we're here to serve our audience, not to get served by our audience. And so
Yes.
once you've healed from that injury, sure, talk about that injury, talk about how this I heard some of the things you were talking about. Okay, you're way behind on rent and you're about to lose your business because you're way behind on rent. Well, if you manage to make it out of that, then absolutely talk about that, because there's probably a great story in how you learned some better business practices, or maybe the community stepped up and helped you. I mean, there's a restaurant that I frequent, and their kids go to school with my kids. They're in an old building, grandfathered in, not up to code for a lot of things because they don't have to be, because it's been a restaurant for, since biblical
Yeah.
times or whatever, right? Well, they had a fire. And now, as they rebuild, though, they can't rebuild to where they were. They have to rebuild to all modern code. And it's a lot of money for this small sandwich taco kind of place, very popular, wins best burger in the city pretty much every year. But they're not made of money and they don't have the hundreds of thousands that it's going to cost them to, right? So, look, I'm going in there a little bit more than I normally do to try to help support them. And I know a lot of people in the community are doing the same thing. They'll come through it, I'm pretty certain. And that on the other end, it would be great for them to talk about how they felt so supported by the
Yep.
community, and that's
Yep.
why they do the things that they do to support the community in turn, and so on and so forth. That's a great story. Um, that it's not the time for them to continuously be talking about, oh my god, there was a fire, oh my god, we need so much money, right? Like, yeah, it got written up in the paper, everybody in town heard about what happened, and if anybody's going to help, they're going to help. But they don't make that the your story going forward for the next 6 months
Right.
or a year or whatever, as you're trying to get out of this hole that you're in.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice, and I think it makes it way more powerful when you give us the real, but give us the succession, or give us what happened after it,
Right.
or give us the triumph. So we leave on that good, warm feeling. Because earlier you were talking about how human beings, we love stories, but most of us like the stories with the happy ending.
Yeah,
And,
right.
when we want to support triumph. And so I love that take where you can still be vulnerable and authentic, but maybe practice, being a little bit patient and doing it at the right time.
Right. Well, I mean, think about it. It's movies and stuff like, I mean, something, think about rom-coms or something, right? You get these people in the beginning of the rom-com and their lives are okay or whatever, and then they meet each other and they really like each other, and then, it's a rom-com. So in the end, they end up together, right? But in the middle, what happens? It's all this drama and this mess and stuff like that going on, right? Like you said, we love those stories. We love the stories of, like, there's all there's a happy ending, but if there's not a bunch of like struggle in the middle, it's not really much of a story. If they just met each other and everything was super happy all the way along, there's no drama. There wouldn't you wouldn't want to go see that movie, probably, right? It's that struggle in the middle that really makes it a juicy story. But you can't tell that story when you're in the middle of, that's just you crying in your beer with your friends or going to a therapist or something. I mean, do that. Go cry in a beer with your friends, go to a therapist. And once it's all worked out, whether boy gets girl, girl gets boy or not, then you can tell the story when it's all resolved at the end.
I love that. Well, we're getting close to our time here. Is there anything else that you can think of that maybe we haven't discussed that for a small business owner or entrepreneur as they're trying to fine tune their storytelling? And for
Yeah.
many, it's going to be, like you said, either from the stage or on social media or those many of those platforms. What do you want to leave with the audience today?
Yeah, I'll leave the audience in it, and if we have 2 minutes, I'll tell a real
Yes,
quick story.
absolutely.
So when I'm 52 years old, so I was when I was 7 years old. It's 1979. America's love affair with the long haul trucker was at its high. The Smokey and the Bandit and Trucker, and I don't know. There Hollywood made a zillion movies about truck driving. I grew up in a small town. Loved trucks. And my friend and I would go down, we'd get on our bikes and we'd ride down to the rural route that ran through town where the trucks would go by. And we'd stand on the side of the road, trying to get the truckers to blow their horn for us. And the truckers would blow their horn. Now, of course, on that road, there's vans going by, there's cars going by, there's pickup trucks going by, there's all kinds of things going by, right? They don't have air horns, so they don't blow their horns for us. But we don't care. We're just doing this and getting the trucks to blow their horn. Normally, I tell that story with a little more pizzazz and I fill it out a little bit more. But the point here is that you've got stories to tell, okay? And you're targeting some audience. In my story, the audience was truck drivers, right? We were trying to get the truck drivers to blow their horn, and they were blowing their horn. Now, if we sat around and worried about, well, what about the guy in the van and the woman driving the car and that woman driving that pickup truck and stuff, like, what will she think if she sees us pumping our fists? Maybe we shouldn't pump our fists because they won't know what we're doing. Right now, the truck drivers aren't going to blow their horn for us because we're in our heads and we're not like pumping our fist. So when you go out to tell your story, keep in mind who's the story for. Make sure that it's well targeted to who the story's for, and then forget everybody else. Um, Normally I would use some saltier language, but just
Oh, you can be salty.
forget everybody else because they're not your customer, they're not your ideal customer, your ideal client. They're not going to buy from you anyway. And one of the great things I think that a lot of people forget about marketing in general is that it's as important to push people away as it is to draw people to you, right? Because by pushing people away, like, you can build a huge email list, but if half the people on your email list are not good customers for you anyway, like, what good is that, right? Don't worry about offending people, losing followers, losing people off your email list, whatever. Good, lose them because they're not the people that are right for you. Narrow your list down to the people that you're really trying to go after and then go after them hard. And in story can be very good at that, right? Story can be very attractive and it can also be very alienating, and that's good. That should be by design. Let the people that you don't want be alienated by your story, because the people that you do want will be really attracted by your story. Don't get into your own head and be like, oh, but what if I offend these people? I mean, I don't want to offend anybody, but if the people are offended by the story that's really well crafted to go after my audience, then they're clearly not my audience. And then that's fine. Then I don't really need to worry about that.
That is such good advice because a lot of business owners I know get caught up in the numbers or they get caught up on
Right.
how things appear or even that comparison. You try not to, but it's like, oh, well, so and so has a 60,000 email list or, 140K in
Right.
their private group on Facebook. And it's like, well, would you rather have that and you're just like throwing spaghetti at the wall trying to see what sticks? Or would you really rather have that curated audience that connects with you every single time? Or that's there for you versus they're going to unsubscribe the first time you send something they don't like. I don't know.
Yeah.
I love when I get some unsubscribes. I'm like, great, make room for the folks who really like to read my
Sure.
newsletters when they come through. So Thank you.
Right. You want your open rate to be high. You want
Yes.
your click-through rate to be high. And everybody that's on your list that is not really, that doesn't really belong there, it's fractional, but it's it is driving down your open rate and your click-through rate and everything else. Get them out of there. We don't want them.
That's powerful advice. I mean, you gave a lot of good nuggets.
Well, thank you. I
Beth,
appreciate
you're
that.
too kind. You're too kind. So let's say someone's listening in and they're like, okay, I got to work with Seth because this is they're in their head. They can't really sort out
Yeah.
all of the storytelling. Like, how can people connect with you?
Sure. Well, I mean, like most of us, I'm all over the place, but I will say if people are really interested in this, then I have a gift, an offer. I say go to my website, sethdonlin.com/Leah, and you can then download the Skeptic's Guide to Storytelling. And it will, skeptic guide could be two things. It could be convincing you not to be skeptical. It's not this type of guide. It's the type of guide that's going to teach you what you need to do to start getting really good at deploying your stories in a business setting, how to identify those stories, how to polish those stories up, how to build the hooks, how to have the call to action at the end, so on and so forth. So if this is something you're interested in, then come to my website, like I said, sethdonlin.com/Leah, and download the guide. And if you like what you're hearing from the guide, then obviously the guide will have information on how you can work with me further.
That is fantastic. And for those of you listening, it's going to be right there in the show notes. Or if you're on the web, it'll be right there on the website for you to just click through. And you need to I'm going to download the guide. So because I'm sure
Oh, thanks. I
I got to think.
appreciate
And
it.
when I do my ring stick story, I'm going to tag you in it. So you can see, like,
Oh, thanks. I
you
appreciate that.
created this monster set.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
Well,
we'll get that going. You tag me, I'll jump in and like it, and we'll go back and forth with a few comments, and that'll drive the algorithm right from the very beginning.
and man, I need help. Instagram. TikTok is great.
Oh,
Instagram's killing me these days.
I'm with you. I'm with you there. I've
Well, I
got a
appreciate
I've got a little I'm in a little Instagram program right now trying to figure out like what is happening. It's not popping off the way it used to for me. I gotta relearn some things.
Well, if it works out for you, please send it my way because I'm trying to figure it out, and I'm like, screw it. I I don't know what else to do at this point. Well, I appreciate you so much, Seth, for giving us more than what we truly deserve. Thank you so much for your time, for the stories. They were excellent. Now I need to see this wonderful wife of yours that you
Oh
finally
yeah,
bagged.
well she
We
is
need we need
she's
part two
wonderful.
of that story.
I almost wore I have a T-shirt that Santa brought me a few years ago. It says "I love my awesome wife," and I almost wore that
Santa.
while I was recording. But yeah, exactly, Santa. But it's short sleeve, and it's only like 60 degrees in my office right now because my office is part of a barn. My wife owns a farm, and so I'm like share space with the barn, and it's chilly in here. So no
Well,
no
I
short sleeve. I love my wife T-shirt.
well next time because you definitely have to come back. You have to wear
Oh
the
well,
shirt.
thank you. I would
And
love to. Anytime.
all right, Seth. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll chat soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, Leah.
All right,
Bye.
bye.